Fort Hill is a triple earthen embankment site located high atop a promontory bluff above Rocky River. The people who constructed this earthwork used a variety of soils of varying textures and colors to produce an enduring and symbolically rich earthen form on a monumental scale. These types of earthworks were largely non-defensive and for the most part do not contain residential structures or debris. In this picture here, you can actually see the three earthen mounds, embankments that my students are standing on. The earthworks were primary places for ceremony. They represent major alterations to the landscape for the purpose of creating and sustaining sacred architecture of lasting and evolving spiritual value. Fort Hill sits 100 feet above the Rocky River on top of a vertical bluff of blue shale. The Cleveland Metro Parks have created a beautiful system of trails over the years, including the placement of a tall wooden stairway, all 154 stairs, by the way, that winds up the cliff edge. Here's an aerial view showing the Fort Hill landform, and you can see it sits on the end of that plateau. The Fort Hill is situated at the edge of a once glaciated Appalachian plateau made up of sandstones and shales. The soils are highly fertile, and the floodplain has always been considered prime agricultural land. Since about 8000 BC, the Rocky River Valley has been covered by a mesophysic forest canopy. The site was first reported by noted Cleveland archaeologist, geologist, surveyor, Colonel Charles Whittlesey, and later expanded upon by Matthew Canfield Reed. Fort Hill was the first archaeological site recorded in Cuyahoga County, hence the official designation of Fort Hill is 33 CU1. This is a copy of the archaeological inventory form from that early era in the turn of the last century. Most of the Ohio archaeological inventory forms look very different than this little 3x5 card. In an article, Ancient Earthworks of Northern Ohio, which was first published in 1878, the article states that the Fort Hill earthwork hilltop enclosed some 5 acres. The western wall measured over 125 feet in length, and that the width of the walls was approximately 15 feet east-west, and that the ditch between each wall was about 11 feet wide. So at the time of the height, or at that time, the height of the walls were about 4 feet high, and there were no visible entries into the earthwork complex. An enclosure can generally be defined as an open space that's been physically bounded for some purpose, right? At least in part by architectural elements. There are at least 2 other major triple embankment sites in Northern Ohio. One's located in the city of Weymouth in present-day Medina, Ohio. This earthwork has been completely obliterated, the one that you see on the right here, and since it was bulldozed and in the late 19th century. The other triple embankment site is located in Paynesville, Ohio, and is known locally as Indian Point or the Lyman site. Hilltop enclosures were generally designed for maximum visibility. Not only would there have been an expense in clearing and a significant acreage within the immediate surrounding area of the walls of these structures in order to make them visible, but there would also have been a high degree of annual maintenance cost in keeping the area clean and clear of vegetation. To date, these earthworks at Indian Point fall around 137 BC, making this an early woodland period construction as well, and being contemporaneous with the Fort Hill earthworks. So I'm showing you this images so you can see probably what Fort Hill looked like in antiquity some 2,300 years ago. The Indian Point earthwork is perhaps, again, the best preserved earthwork in all of Northeast Ohio. Look at the height of the wall there, right? This is likely what the height of these walls at the Fort Hill Earthwork Complex really looked like in their heyday. So it was really quite an impressive feat of monument construction. These earthworks are often found in association with significant water features. And the Indian Point one contains, here's you see Payne Creek Falls, located just a short distance from the actual earthwork itself. Returning back to Fort Hill, many of these earthwork sites, like Indian Point and Fort Hill, are situated so that they're nearly surrounded by watercourses, suggesting a cosmological linkage to the creation of Earth, which emerged from and was surrounded by the primordial waters of the lower world as related by modern Native American stories. Here we have a description of what early scholars believed was the purpose of these types of earthworks, as stated by Matthew Canfield Reed in 1892. These types of earthworks have the appearance of being defensive works, both in their locations and mode of construction. They ordinarily occupy elevated spurs, projecting from the tableland into the valleys, overlooking expansive alluvial plains, often where erosion has left these spurs with a narrow connection with the tableland and a wider expanse of surface on the part projecting into the valley. In such cases, the works consist of 1, 2, or 3 ditches and embankments across their neck, plainly intended to protect the spur against aggression from the tableland. We're going to come back to that in a little bit. But here you see in this undated photograph, courtesy of the Ohio Historical Connection, we think this is probably 1930s, 1940s, and you can sort of still see 2 of the embankments. There's arrows on the right there that sort of highlight the embankments going across. And you can see the trails that went across, which also have been degrading the earthwork ever since. Fort Hill is also known for another important feature. The shale beds, which make up the plateau, contain the fossil remains of a 20-foot armor-plated fish known as Dunkleosteus that swam in the oceans that uncovered most of Northeast Ohio during the late Devonian period, some 350 million years ago. The Cleveland Museum of Natural History conducted limited archaeological excavations and investigations at Fort Hill in 1985. Their investigations located only 2 pieces of debitage and no pottery, leading them to consider this a late woodland construction. However, our project starting out in 2017 was the first comprehensive exploration of Fort Hill. In 2017, we contour mapped Fort Hill, and much to our surprise, our mapping survey located 2 previously unknown earthen mounds located directly west of the earthwork in the area circled here. Together, these mounds likely served as a gateway, marking the official entryway into the earthwork.
But if you want to listen.
And this is why we now refer to this as an earthwork complex, because it's more than simply 3 earthen embankments and ditches. There's other earthworks in association with it. As you can see, the mounds are barely visible today due to previous plowing by early settlers who plowed much of this landform during the late 19th century. We have several historic reminiscence by the early settlers who lived in the Olmsted area. And one of these published historic sources indicate that James Ruppel, one of the earliest settlers to Olmsted Township, plowed much of the top of Fort Hill from the mid to late 19th century. And so in this LiDAR image that you see here, you can still see the plow scars from past farming activities located up on top of Fort Hill. So the site has really been denigrated over the years as a result of that as well. This viewing platform that the Cleveland Metro Parks have put up to really give you a better view of the earthwork is actually put over part of the southern gateway mound. They're hoping to move this to the center point so that you can appreciate these mounds now. Gateway is a general term used to describe architectural elements whose purpose is to control access into and out of the earthwork complex. Some of these gateways function as foresights from the center of the nearby mounds for observing astronomical alignments. These alignments include maximum and minimum moon rises and the sunrises on the solstices or equinoxes. Elements associated with gateways include embankment walls, mounds, limestone pavements, ditches, ponds, walkovers, ramps, and sort of exterior spurs. Here we have another LiDAR image showing the embankments and what may be other anomalies located to the west of the to the earthworks itself. And that's going to be another area that we'll discuss here shortly. Here's a 3D surface map that one of my colleagues, Mac Klein, has put together for us. I'm showing the Fort Hill earthworks in sort of exaggerated profile to give an idea of what these things, how they were been preserved. Now, these images that we've been seeing, sort of that's been the hallmark for our project as of this late, is from my former student and now colleague, Matt Barbado. He was tasked with the job of creating 3D renderings of the Fort Hill Earthwork Complex as they may have looked about 2,300 years ago. And I think he did an incredibly amazing job bringing this earthwork back to life as it may have looked some 2,300 years ago. So here's a view looking west. Here's a view looking east through the center line between the two gateway mounds on either side, looking in on the first embankment, the ditch and then embankment. So this is a great view of looking at the horizon. The eastern sky would have been a perfect view from here. Here's a view looking south. And again, notice the water in the ditches. We'll talk more about that in a little bit as well. And here's a view, again, looking north. So you can sort of see the earthwork in all its glory in all the different directions. And we can see just how the landform was really modified. Another one of my students, CJ Demchuk, has been playing with volumetric assessments of these earthworks to try and figure out how much erosion has occurred in the 131 years that have passed since Whittlesey's 1878 report. So using Whittlesey's measurements, the three walls contain some 319 cubic meters of earth, but today, due to the past effects of erosion and plowing, the earthwork contains just 162 cubic meters of earth. This represents a loss of over 157 cubic meters, or roughly half its size, as reported in 1878. So we're trying to monitor this now and prevent Rocky River from trying to erode more of the earthwork away, but it's sort of a hopeless cause. The river bends right at the front of right below the earthwork. To date, we have conducted 10 major geophysical surveys of the Fort Hill Earthwork Complex using our FM 256 flux gate gradiometer and also our ground penetrating radar unit. Here you can see us setting up our survey grid in 20 meter by 20 meter grids as we're about to conduct our survey. Here we are actually conducting our geophysical survey. You can see Mike Dodrell on the left, and Clem Skehan on the lower right side, and one of my other distinguished colleagues, Rachel Micah, in the background running the flux gate. These guys have been with me for the last 5 years on every aspect of this project. So I want to acknowledge their presence in every bit of what we're doing. Here we are actually, Vaughn, Augustine, and Mike Call actually processing our geophysical data and producing a nice map. Now, we've gotten really good with this piece of equipment. Here's a contour plot showing the embankments and some of the magnetic anomalies. The circled areas are where the embankments were, and all of the yellows and reds that you see, it's from disturbance. There's a small wooden fence that's only about 2 feet high that encircle the earthwork to try to prevent people from walking on it. And in building that small little fence, they put giant metal bolts to hold the wood together, and that's what you're seeing is the magnetic anomalies being flagged from the steel bolts that are used in the fencing. So we're only interested in the stuff on the earthwork. So in 2017, we were granted permission by the Cleveland Metro Parks to conduct archaeological investigations at Fort Hill. The first excavation we conducted was of a magnetic anomaly located on the westernmost embankment. And so here you can see the exact location in relation to the earthwork. So just below the surface, we discovered a firecrack rock feature that we suspect represents an important fire ritual associated with the earliest initial construction of the earthwork. This feature appears to be more like a scattering of firecrack rock and bits of charcoal rather than a typical fire hearth feature, since little oxidized soil and very little charcoal was actually detected in the unit. It sure seemed like a smattering. We also discovered a lone post mold and a storage pit in the same unit, which dated to about the same time period. The charcoal was collected. Oh, there we go. Oh, let's go back. So there's the post mold and there's the storage pit to the right. Here we are collecting charcoal to send out for accelerated mass spectrometry. The charcoal yielded a date of 360 to 156 BC, making Fort Hill an early woodland period construction. So we would associate this with, in Ohio archaeology of Adena, or North Midwest archaeology is the Adena culture, who likely created this earthwork. Once we were done with this unit, again, we placed geotech fabric across the floor of the unit to separate the backfill from the sterile subsoils, in case future archaeologists ever wish to reopen or re-explore our units. These are things that are required by our permits. And of course, all the units are then backfilled. And that's the fun part of the job. In 2018, we returned to Fort Hill to conduct further excavations. Our plan was to excavate a magnetic anomaly located in a ditch of the easternmost embankment, as well as to excavate a test unit in the woods west of the earthwork, just simply to compare the stratigraphy of the area so that we can compare the area to the west of the earthwork to that of the earthwork, to see what the differences in soils were. So here we are at the start of the 2018 season, having to march all that stuff up the 154 stairs each day. And that was no easy task, and it was fun to start your day working up a good sweat climbing up those stairs. The Metro Parks built that stairway for runners. So, we're huffing and puffing carrying all this equipment up, and it's all day long. There's runners that go up and down these stairs. It's hilarious. Not hilarious, but for us it is, because we couldn't even, it takes us forever just to walk up the stairs. And here these guys are running up the stairs at full blast, up and down continually. We also started working in the area west of the earthwork. And as you can tell by this photo, it's heavily forested. And it makes it difficult to use any kind of geophysical device or flux gate or GPR in these areas with the amount of trees and tree fall and roots in this area. However, on the very first day of our investigations in 2018, I found a projectile point eroding out of a fresh cut in the hillside where we were nearby where we were working. The projectile point happens to be a Steuben stem projectile point, which can be dated to the Middle Woodland period between 100 and 500 AD. After finding that point, we just basically randomly picked a spot in the wooded area west of the embankment, just to simply set up a test unit so we could explore the stratigraphy, again, in order to compare this to the area of the earthwork. However, little did we know what we would eventually uncover in this area. Located just below the surface was what we thought was a fire hearth at first. However, it wasn't, but rather it was a post mold for some sort of structure. The post mold was large, between 45 and 50 centimeters. And though the post was missing, it contained a large clutch of FCR, firecrack rock, which you can see in the photograph there, and charcoal. It would appear that the post was, and at some point, pulled from the ground, and the firecrack rock was intentionally thrown in with other debris into the hole. This is a common occurrence at sites dating to this time period in Northeast Ohio, and often trash and other debris are often thrown into these holes once the posts were pulled. So we cross-sectioned the feature to better understand it, and we collected more than 800 grams of charcoal. Here's a photograph of some of that charcoal. Because the post mold was located some 30 meters due west along the center line of the gateway mounds, we suspected that the pole may have served as a marker from which astronomical observations may have taken place. And here's Matt Barbato's excellent reconstruction of what that looked like. In other words, a shaman or a priest might have stood at this pole, much like the center pole for a typical wood henge, to observe or to conduct rituals associated with either the solstices or the equinoxes or some other important ritual. But this is what we think that this post mold was representing from what we discovered. We sent the charcoal off for radiocarbon dating, and it yielded a date between 61 BC and AD 65. Again, placing this feature at the cusp of that early to middle woodland transition. So now let's take a look at some of the meager artifacts that were recovered in 2018. To date, all of the artifacts found at our investigations at Fort Hill could almost literally be held in one hand, okay? We didn't recover many for 3 years worth of excavations at Fort Hill, and we didn't expect to find many either, considering that this place was a sacred location. Just as you wouldn't expect to find trash in most of your sacred places of your church, we didn't expect to find much here either. And so the lack of artifacts here strongly supports the notion that we're dealing with an important ceremonial site. Even the soils were carefully screened. Virtually no rock of any kind was found in the fill of any of the earthwork that we excavated. To us, this likely represented that the building of the earthwork was also a sacred endeavor and was carefully planned and coordinated. We found only a handful of chert debitage and basically only 18 pieces to date. 18, right? Macroscopic examination of the debitage indicates that some of the chert came from known sources in southern Ohio, more than 120 miles away, while other chert to come from, again, tenuous, Davis County, Indiana, nearly 600 kilometers away. How did that material get here at Fort Hill? Now, that may seem like a long reach. However, a colleague of mine, Metin Aaron from Kent State University, he's been doing excellent work in looking at stone artifacts from the Paleo Crossing site in Adena County, Ohio. Remember, macroscopic inspection is not always a reliable method for sourcing chert. But he has shown from his work in basically using neutron activation that much of the chert found at Paleo Crossing, which is a Paleo Indian site, has been shown to be coming from a source of Wyandotte chert from Harrison County, Indiana, some 450 to 510 kilometers away. So again, this may also be what we're dealing with here at Fort Hill. Hopefully in the future, we'll be able to conduct neutron activation on these samples to verify that. But right now it remains tentative. We also found this interesting triangular bend break tool made out of chert. This particular tool was likely hafted to a wooden handle at one point and used as a cutting tool. We found a couple of slate scrapers. And we also have a portion of a groundstone celt and likely a small burin used for engraving. And that's basically the extent of our artifact collection after 3 years of excavation. And of course, we recovered more than 200 pounds of fire-cracked rock from these various post molds and scatterings and fire hearths that we'll soon discuss. We also saved and floated much of the soil from all those features that we excavated. And here you can see me floating soil in my backyard. And here's what it looks like. Doesn't that look delicious, right? All we need is some pepper and some salt. We have something good to eat. No, not really. So after floating that soil, I then send off that light fraction to Catherine Parker, our ethnopaleobotanist at the University of Michigan, who identified organic plant material found in that matrix. The results of the botanical surveys were quite amazing. Not only was there a large quantity of red cedar, a tree considered sacred by many woodland cultures, but we had pine and several other varieties of oak that were being burned in these fire pits or were used as part of the posts. In terms of other plant material, our sample contained many early food crops, such as pigweed, chenopodium, little barley, and gourds. The botanical findings may suggest that the ceremonies conducted at Fort Hill involved subsistence activities such as planting or consecrating food to evoke rain and the change of seasons. It's important to remember that these earthworks were created by small-scale societies engaged in hunting and gathering the region's wild plants and animal communities, with a significant focus on the cultivation and domesticated plants of the Eastern Agricultural Complex, which included all of the plants that you see here. Basically, many of these, the pigweed and the bulrush were used as like a gruel, right? You would grind up the seeds and put it and add it into a gruel that you would use for your food. In 2018, we also wanted to investigate these ditches that lay before each of these earthen embankments. A ditch can be defined as a distinct linear depression that are placed parallel to the interior or exterior of these embankment walls. And the ditches at Fort Hill were specifically lined with glacial clays and likely intended to hold water as they do today. And you can see in this image in the winter, the water in this western ditch. As such, they were likely seen as entrances to the primordial waters of the underworld, or the place where life originally sprang in mythic times, according to Native American lore. Our excavations of the ditch were also quite fruitful. As we dug further down, we also encountered another thick layer of friable clay, which would have been impermeable to water. Therefore, we suspect that these ditches were intentionally designed to hold water. And all of this matrix in the earthworks, we dug down to bedrock. All that matrix, all that earth was brought in probably from the floodplain down below, the plateau in which the earthwork rests. At the top of the base of this layer, just above the bedrock, we found a light scattering of charcoal and again FCR, as if someone simply threw it across the bottom of the floor, perhaps to sanctify or to bless the earthwork prior to construction, is what we suspect that we're seeing the activities associated with the earliest construction of the earthwork. And of course, the backfilling is always the fun part, putting the dirt back in to make it look like it was never touched. In our 2019 season at Fort Hill was perhaps the most rewarding of all. And as you can see here in this picture, we had to remove some of the branches and trees that fell during the winter months so that we can conduct another geophysical survey to get some better results. And here we are conducting more geophysics on the earthwork. And this survey proved to really be the best of all the surveys that we had done there. They produced the best results. And during this survey, we recorded more than 25 major magnetic anomalies, which you can see highlighted here in black. And we will be exploring all these. The areas to the upper left in that first earthwork are the areas where our test units were located. The trace plot map shows the peaks of these magnetic anomalies. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we haven't been able to excavate any of those features. We know they're there. We're dying to see what's in there. But because of the pandemic, we were shut down for the past 2 years. So hopefully we'll be able to investigate these anomalies soon. We want to know what's going on. What are they doing in this earthwork? And what's really its true purpose? However, we did turn our attention to the wooded area to the west of the earthwork. And here we're conducting another one of these gradiometer surveys that in the areas that we can really get in there and test. And our results were quite remarkable as well. And here you see an image. You can just make out a line of magnetic anomalies, which appear to be a row of post molds. While the rains prevented us from really investigating most of these features, we did manage to dig a couple of them. And basically what we found, these were post molds. It's not clear what these posts may have represented. They could have represented the outline of a large structure. And if it was a very large structure, perhaps, in the matrix of about 15 meters. But given its overall size and shape, we suspect it might be a possible wood henge. All this, again, remains tenuous until we can do some ground truthing. And ground truthing is in archaeology, as you all know, is probably the most important part of verifying our results. We then brought in the big gun. Here you can see Mike Dodrell carrying in our GPR unit, climbing up those 154 stairs so we can conduct our GPR survey of these features. Again, the GPR survey confirmed what the gradiometer revealed. But the thing that's really useful about GPR data is that it gives you the depth of the disturbance of the anomalies. So we can actually use an image like this, which may not look like much, but you can see the area of disturbance to the right. And basically by clicking on it with the mouse, you can actually see the depth and how far, where it starts and where it ends, the feature ends, so that you can actually go in and ground truth it and excavate it. So we know that there's a lot of hopeful anomalies there to excavate, and they'll be there for us waiting. So we're waiting until we can get permissions to get back in there. All these flags that you can see in the image here mark those anomalies. So again, we're very, very excited and hopeful that we may find more. To date, no pottery has ever been found in the Rocky River Valley, and we're not sure why. The Cuyahoga Valley, which is the next watershed to the east of here, virtually anywhere you put a shovel in the ground, you're going to find prehistoric materials. However, the Rocky River Valley has a very shallow draft on the river, and it's not navigable year-round, which we suspect, have a lot to do with why we're not finding much in terms of Native American remains. But also the valley is quite narrow. and all of the area of the floodplain really floods a lot. So most likely villages and native habitation spots are on top of the valley walls that are now all completely built by downtown Olmsted and Rocky River, the cities that sort of line the valley here. Located in another area west of the earthwork, using that data that I just showed you that may have been either a structure or a possible wood henge, we started excavating a couple of these features. So we'll get to that in just a moment. I'm jumping the gun here. On the other, also to the north and to the west of in the woodland area, west of the earthwork, we encountered a fire pit. And here, unfortunately, due to the heavy rains over a few days, we got like 6 inches of rain over the course of 2 days. That raised the water table at this site, making it impossible to excavate any further. As you can see, Matt Barbado here trying to pool out the water, which was not pretty. So our excavations were basically postponed for almost a month until the water table went back down. When the water table went back down, we were able to continue excavating this feature that was determined through GPR and through Fluxgate. And we just nicked the corner of a large fire hearth feature in the southwest corner of this unit. The radiocarbon date for this feature revealed a date somewhere between 100 BC and AD 58, again, on that cusp of the early woodland to middle woodland transition, or the Adena to Hopewell transition. Thus, it would appear that this area was occupied for several centuries by several different cultural groups. Now, because we located that semicircular ring of post molds in the Fluxgate, we decided to excavate some of those features. There was 2 of those posts that we saw in the Fluxgate data. Though the top post mold is difficult to see because it really isn't fully exposed yet, the one on the right is clear in the image that you can see. We just got half of it there in our profile. Again, this post was rather large, and unfortunately, not enough charcoal was recovered for us to run a radiocarbon date on this, but the other one yielded a date again around 61 BC. Here, so there you can see the post. Michael Dodrell again is using a bucket auger to further investigate some of the soils below, just before we get to bedrock. The image on the right again shows Michael pounding a piece of steel rebar. These are protocols that were enacted by the park system. In all of our test units, we put a 12-inch piece of steel rebar in the northwest corner so that the unit can be located again with a metal detector in the future, should anyone need to go in there. So what does all this tell us? Well, charcoal removed from test unit 1 and 2 dates between 360 and 156 BC and likely represents consecrated rituals associated with the earthwork's initial construction. This suggests that the earthwork was constructed during the early woodland period of 1000 BC to 100 BC by the culture group known as the Adena. Charcoal recovered from the post mold in test unit 4, the unit located west of the earthwork, dated between 61 BC and AD 65, placing this feature at the interface between the early and middle woodland periods. That Steuben expanded projectile point also indicates a middle woodland occupation. So our findings suggest that multiple groups of people occupied or used the Fort Hill Earthwork Complex as a ceremonial site. The presence of multiple groups living at or utilizing Fort Hill suggests that the native peoples thought of this bluff as a sacred location for a long time. So what was the purpose? What was the function of the Fort Hill Earthwork Complex? Let's take a look. So 120 years ago, early antiquarians suggested that some of the promontory earthworks may have functioned as signal stations to warn allied villages of an approaching enemy, or to signal or to communicate some sort of message. We're not sure if that fits here at Fort Hill, but you do have an excellent view of other archaeological sites from the hilltop here at Fort Hill. In 1850, Charles Whittlesey referred to these types of earthworks as forts or fortifications based on their strategic topographic locations. Early colonial forts like Fort Pitt on the right looked similar to many of these earthwork constructions, and thus the comparison was often made that these types of earthen embankments likely served as a similar way as a fort. Archaeoastronomers suggest that these types of earthworks may have also served as astronomical observatories to observe the sun, the moon, or some other astronomical body. Within such landscapes, many cultures often made references to solar happenings and calendrical dates, mainly the solstices and the equinoxes that can be observed along the horizon and skyline. So here you can actually see, curiously, on the fall equinox of 2017, we noticed that the sun happened to rise directly through the center of the gateway mounds leading into Fort Hill. And we wondered if this was a coincidence or a predetermined or purposely planned construction designed to encapsulate and incorporate this solar alignment as part of a larger cosmological underpinning. Earthworks like Fort Hill that incorporate astronomical alignments reveal a long tradition of observing the apparent movements of celestial bodies and attest to their surveying skills to produce monumental architecture that accurately reflects those alignments. Here's a drawing of a Mississippi woodhenge, and it was a carefully planned design to mark and denote the rise and set points of the sun on the summer and winter solstices and on the fall and spring equinoxes. Perhaps some of this cosmological ideology is also behind the building of the Fort Hill Earthwork Complex. And this is sort of our composite of that. That area that converges to the west there is the area where that center line pole was. So we suspect that that pole may have been a sighting device used for just this purpose. And the inside of each of these mounds, the gateway mounds, actually served as the boundaries that may have marked summer sunrise and winter sunrise on these equinox dates. We need to sort of explore that a bit more, but the moon was also a particular celestial body that Native Americans paid close attention to. The moon has an 18.6-year cycle that we know at other prehistoric architecture, like that image on the right of the great Newark earthworks, that encapsulates various risings and setting points of the moon. One of the things that we still need to do is investigate whether the moon is being observed through this earthwork, or is it just the sun? We need much more work in that regard, and that's our next major operation to work on that. Now, were these sites used as social gathering places, religious shrines, or as pilgrimage sites? Earthen enclosures tend not to be the locus for domestic activities. Artifacts are often very sparse through these kinds of complexes, suggesting short-term specialized usages. The notion that earthworks were sacred ceremonial gathering places persists today, since the walls of the earthwork can be seen to provide a degree of privacy, suggesting a more symbolic usage or purpose as well. With the discovery of the new gateway mounds leading into the enclosure, it's likely that these mounds signify a precise processional way or a processional entranceway into the sacred enclosure located near the stairway leading up to Fort Hill. Now, place provides the physical setting for everything else that follows. With that in mind, there are certain landscape features that have not changed significantly since prehistoric times. The locations of hills and valleys relative to the rising and setting of the sun and moon are essentially the same as they were 2,000 years ago. Sometimes these features or relationships that made a place special seem very obvious to us, such as a location that provides a great vantage point for watching or looking at a solstice or an equinox sunrise along a major river valley, for example, or over a prominent plateau. Other times, what makes a place special is not really obvious and based on idiosyncratic reasons and perceptions that may be beyond our ability to recognize. The meaning is not intrinsic to a place, rather meaning emerges as people engage with a place. For the Adena and other early Ohio peoples, the ceremonies and rituals involve movements that have expression to their way in the world was inexorably tied to special and sacred places to the landscape. So together, the landscapes and various landscape features, the human and non-human agents, and the lived experiences were all interwoven into the fabric that was what made things sacred. The Native American peoples of the eastern woodlands believe in a cosmos that's divided vertically into the earth, the sky, and a watery realm. The sky being associated with the realm of the sun and the thunderbird representing the upper world. The lower world is associated with water and the domain of the great serpent or underwater panther. Remember, the ditches alongside these earthen embankments likely held water, perhaps as an important cosmological symbol, mirroring that creation story. Balance between these realms is the living world that we live in, the world where people populate. So the axis mundi that connects all three realms can be expressed by a special mountain, by a particular tree, an upright pole, right? A column of smoke, or even an earthen mound. And in this beautiful recreation from borrowed from Kent Riley, of Mississippian ideology, you can sort of see all that in one image here of the sacred four-cornered world, supported by these horned serpents. You know, and we look at Mesoamerican culture and we have the sort of four macabres, the earth bearers who raise the sky at the moment of creation. We sort of see the same worldview here in the Eastern Woodlands. So for thousands of years, the Native Americans have explored the Eastern Woodlands and occasionally have come across these special places. They were special for a variety of reasons that evoke the spiritual and the emotional and spiritive responses. Very few artifacts have been found in and around this earthwork, suggesting that the lack of debris may indicate specific rules that govern the use of space and the disposition of waste. While some places resonated with people through their beauty, others may have given rise to wariness, right? These places triggered memories of ancestors or important events. And in some locations, the sun, the moon, the stars lined up with the earth in such a way to inspire awe and wonder, and perhaps enable one's soul to journey through the other world through this view. In any case, what these places had in common is that they facilitated engagement with the sacred, and this was the exact locations that were marked by the prehistoric people of Ohio through the creation of earthworks and mounds. And with that, I want to thank you all for hanging in there with me tonight. And I'd like to again thank Michael and Jim for their kind invitation tonight. I'd like to thank the Cleveland Metro Parks and all the great folks there for their help and assistance in working at their Fort Hill. I'd like to thank Cleveland State University, but most of all, I want to thank all of my students from those 2017 to 2019. And I especially wish to thank my core group, Vaughn Augustine, Matt Barbado, Matt Klein, CJ Demchuk, Michael Dodrell, Mike Call, Rachel Micah, Clem Skihan, for their continued help and support of my research. These guys have stuck with me for 5 and 6 years respectively, and they will stop at a moment's notice to join and do anything they can to help on these archaeological projects. So I couldn't do my work without their help, and I certainly do appreciate it. Most of these guys have all graduated and they're now colleagues, they're no longer students. So I treat them as such. And with that, I'd like to say thank you. And if anybody has any questions, I'd certainly be happy to entertain.
Yes, everyone, please put any questions in the chat feature and I'll read them to Phil. I've been going back and forth with Matt here and telling him how much his artistic talents are very admirable. And he says that Fort Hill is the only site where he's done these CGI renderings.
Yeah, I'm trying to encourage him. We have a plan to work on several others that are the Cuyahoga Valley, which is the next valley system over, has about 13 of these kind of earthworks. And a little bit more than half of them are still existing. And I want to get Matt out there so he can start exploring and doing a whole rendering of all of these. And I think it would really be fruitful. He's just a wonderful individual and he's done an excellent, awesome job. And I can't speak enough of it. So.
All right. How about if you make extra credit for any of the students to ask a question?
Go ahead, guys.
Alice?
Yeah.
Would you like to say something?
Yes, I would. I like to introduce myself because I have done archaeoastronomy in North America. And it's not only not usually cited, it's actually deliberately obscured and is very pertinent here because the date for the site I'm thinking of, Moose Mountain in Saskatchewan, is middle first millennium BCE. In other words, it actually overlaps with these Adena. And I'm going to say something that sounds very nasty, but it's got to be said. A few years ago at the SAA annual meeting and the book exhibits, I saw Anthony Avini signing his latest book on American archaeoastronomy. Well, I had looked in the book in the exhibit a little while before, and I said to him, Tony, why do you never mention Moose Mountain in any of your series of books on American native archaeoastronomy? And he looked me straight in the eye and he said, because it's not one of my sites. In other words, it's been deliberately let out of all the discourse by those who wish to remain masters of the discipline. And that's a nasty thing going on in scholarship, academia, including archaeoastronomy. So I don't know how many people have heard of the Moose Mountain site in Saskatchewan. It's in southeast Saskatchewan, about 200 miles directly north of Minot, North Dakota. So you can figure out approximately. It is on the edge of the massive last terminal moraine of the last glaciation. In other words, it's a very high, long ridge overlooking what was once a large glacial lake Regina. It has a magnificent, breathtaking view all around, except due north, which is wooded. It was actually a refugium for moose during the glaciation, which is why it's called Moose Mountain. So the point is, it is a very large and very carefully built boulder construction, one of at least half a dozen, probably many, many more boulder constructions on the surfaces of the high plains. Instead of earthworks, they did it with boulders. Moose Mountain has 6 stone alignments that point to 6 stellar phenomena, counting the sunrise at solstice as 1. Alignments point to several major stars, and all of them together make it possible to directly observe one day every calendar year. Summer solstice, especially. So it's a magnificent observation point. For what purpose? And I did talk to present people of all the present First Nations in Saskatchewan, and the Cree, Assiniboine, Dakota, Blackfoot used to be in the western part of the province. They all said they knew of the site, but none of them would say that it was their people. They all said, no, it's been there before our people were here. So finally, talking with Plains Cree, who are the main people historically, talking to the elders, and not only directly myself, but I also engaged one of the leaders of the Plains Cree in Saskatchewan to himself talk with elders, with me not there. And he was very interested. They suggested it was for calendar keeping. Now, why would people keep a calendar up there in the high plains? They're all bison hunters. They have seasonal rounds. The point is, you have all these bands, each with its own seasonal round, but they all want to get together by the thousands in order to have major ceremonies, in order to trade, in order to adjudicate disputes, in order to plan military alliances, and to find mates, people to marry, and to gamble and have fun, dances. So these Plains Cree suggested that it was critical to be able to meet at one time in one place. And how would they know the time? By observing summer solstice. And because it rains very heavily in June in Saskatchewan, it actually rained for 4 of the 5 days we were there trying to observe solstice. You have to have additional alignments to other stars such as Sirius and Aldebaran and Fomalhaut and Pilla in order to be able to date if it happens to rain during summer solstice itself. And that is what Moose Mountain has, with 6 different alignments to 6 different stellar phenomena. So that I would urge people to consider the critical importance of calendar keeping in order that a large number of separate communities, each with its own territories, could be able to gather together by the thousands for all the things that are done in the major holiday of a large region of allied people. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
I think that's exactly what people like Brad Lepper and others have argued for the Newark and other places where we really see good evidence for astronomical observatories. So, yeah, I think everybody sort of falls into the idea that, at least from the people that I'm reviewing or looking, I knew nothing about Moose Mountain, and I'll look into it. But the calendar keeping is, I think, is an important part of what they're doing, and I think everyone sort of associated with these earthworks sort of knew that. So thanks for that.
Alice, this is Rudy Pascucci. Will you not be presenting at AIA tomorrow night?
Yes.
Yes, I am. It's the South Florida AIA Society, and it's one of my other interests, which is pre-Columbian transoceanic voyages. Thank you. And there is a recording of last Sunday's same lecture of our Milwaukee Society. So, Jim Reed, did I just send you a link to that recording that just went up for Milwaukee?
Let me mention, okay. This is Rudy. I'm president of AIA South Florida. Hey, Alice.
Yeah. Hi, Rudy. Yeah. So if you can't catch Rudy's group, I'll send Jim Reed for sure the link to, it's just posted yesterday, the recording from last Sunday of the same lecture here in Milwaukee. But yeah, you can see it tomorrow.
It's 8 p.m. tomorrow night. If anybody wants to join in, the best link is on my website at Palm Beach Museum of Natural History. Just go pbmnh.org, and Alice will be on tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Getting a great response, Alice.
Yeah, Rudy, I'll be there. I also want to point out to anybody who's looked through the February Aztlander that tomorrow night will be the 3rd Zoom presentation that Alice is giving just in these first couple of weeks before Valentine's Day. She's a prolific writer. She's written over 20 books. And how can it show up? Anyway, I got one of her books that's The Blackfeet People. They're very dear and near to me. And she's even found a way to sign it and make it personal for me. So thank you for that, Alice. And look, if you're not a subscriber to the Aztlander, hit me up in chat, give me your email address, because Alice will have a 3-page coverage in the March Aztlander. And she's come out with a new book called Girl Archaeologist that you might be interested in. So really thank you for your comments tonight, Alice. And I do have some questions here. Let me go back up. All right. Lynn Marie wants to know, is there an earthworks in Sheffield, Ohio? And French Creek Park comes to mind.
I'm not familiar with that area, so I just don't know.
And
Sorry. Sorry about that.
Sulejin asked, do you think that the surface of the Fort Hill earthworks was grassy, or that it may have been pounded earth?
Oh, I don't know. It was probably left in grass, we would assume, but that area, the whole thing has been heavily plowed for over 100 years, 150 years. So hard to say. We've lost a good chunk of the earthwork, as you could tell from the photos. But there's a lot of subsurface features. So hopefully more of that kind of work will be done in the future. And we can sort of see what kind of grasses or what kind of plants may have been on that. But I suspect that they kept those earthworks pretty clear. And that's generally what we see at many of the earthwork structures in Ohio, at least, is that either they were intentionally burning off the vegetation. So let's say that they're coming up on the approaching, spring equinox here. They would have sent people up there, weeks prior to burn off whatever vegetation may have been on these earthworks, or go up and cut them with some of these tools that we're finding, these scrapers and such, to cut down the weeds and the small trees that may have been growing up in the interim. But we don't really have an idea about that.
And Michael Ruggieri would like to know, you can see 3 sites from Fort Hill. Are they also related to the Adena horizon?
No, they're not, and they're later. And not many people have excavated. Actually, the one site was excavated very briefly over a course of a day. This is the Cleveland Metro Parks are very protective about their archaeology, and so to get a permit is pretty difficult to begin with, because they don't follow the government guidelines. If I work in a national park, there's other guidelines that you have to, in permits, ARPA permits and other things to get. And the Metro Parks do not have the same sort of requirements. They're much more protective of any of their prehistoric sites, so they don't really let a lot of people do any excavation. I'm really the first archaeologist who's actually worked in that park in, probably 30 years or more. So yeah, but to get your answer, the sites that you saw on that hilltop, they are not contemporaneous with Fort Hill. At least that's what we can tell. But you're talking about one day of surface collecting and/or small shovel testing, so we don't really have a good handle on it. We know there's a burial in one of them, in one of the sites up there, and that dates to a later time period. But we don't really have a good handle on that.
And Bill's asking, he's saying, Phil, great talk. There is a pretty definitive Adena influence reflected in early woodland earthworks along the Mississippi River bluffs in eastern Iowa, low ring ditches around conical mounds, and so on. Have you had a chance to look at the Iowa earthwork material I sent you last week? As you know,
not yet. I printed it all out, and we were dealing with some other major issues at school this sort of with a meeting today. But I will, and I have stuff that's going to be sent off to him. I'm intrigued. I did sort of briefly look at the material, Mr. Bill, there, and I will get with you shortly on that.
He says there's a linear parallel paired ridges and ditches on a bluff between 2 ravines that look a lot like Fort Hill.
Yeah, I saw that, and so I'm actually thrilled to really get into that. I haven't had a chance yet. our department at Cleveland State University, we're undergoing another merging. So there's been a lot of discussions on what's going on and where we're at. So I've been focused on that as the program director for anthropology.
And Lourdes asked, does Ohio contain more earthworks than any other surrounding states?
Oh, that's going to be depending on who you ask, right? In Northeast Ohio proper, we have maybe three dozen max. But, you know, if you move further in the southern part of the state, South Central, you know, the Ross County, Chillicothe area, you know, you're talking hundreds. William Mills in 1915 in Ross County alone recorded something like 120 sites. But today we know there's more than 800 mound sites in Ross County alone. So yeah, there's a lot. And just, you know, that's to have survived into this time. You know, we can imagine, you know, thousands and thousands more that have been plowed over by modern building. And, you know, that's the shame of all of this, is that, you know, we lost all of that data and all of those, you know, those finds from just, you know, the early settlers moving in and building on the same places. Because, you know, of course, you know, the settlers are going to build in the same places that the Native Americans did. They chose these areas carefully, right? To capture that wind be up on a little higher bluff on a 90-degree summer day to catch that wind, as opposed to being down below. The same thing that everybody would want. So yeah, we've lost a lot of sites. But yeah, thanks for that question, Lourdes.
And Senna Ulrich would like to ask, what kind of work are your former students, current colleagues doing now? Are they still working on Ohio earthworks?
Not necessarily Ohio Earthworks, but one of them, Mac, is on there right now. He works for the federal government doing archaeology. I think he's in Pennsylvania right now. Some of my other students are doing other work, but are hoping to jump back and work with me again this summer. Some of them are. Two of them are actually doing archaeologically related jobs in which they use their training as anthropologists in dealing with the public and dealing with other aspects. So we're pretty lucky in having a good showing of scholarship and continued work.
Steve would like to know, were any offerings found at the bottom of any of the post holes, or did you not excavate any or all to the very bottom?
We excavated everything to the sterile subsoils, and there is nothing there. And that's why we want to go back and explore those magnetic anomalies that were recorded in our last geophysical survey to see that. We suspect one of the things that you just can't really get a good idea of what the earthwork looks like today. We need aerial imagery, but we're really close to Cleveland Hopkins Airport. We're less than a half a mile away, and the FAA won't let us fly a drone because of the endangered airspace. So we're going to try to get a balloon to go up over this so we can get an aerial view. But going around the earthwork, as I said, is a small fence, but also a compacted gravel. I've been trying to consult with the Metro Parks about the do's and don'ts. And before I could say don't, they went up there and dumped hundreds and hundreds of tons of gravel on a pathway that goes all the way around the earthwork and basically pounded it in. So it's about consistency of cement today. And perhaps the most important area of the earthwork, which would have been, if you're looking through the gateway mounds and going over the three embankments, the area behind that, at the very pinnacle of that plateau, likely would have been the place of the greatest importance of where the rituals were probably really being conducted, and probably the most sacred part of the entire earthwork was back in there. They pounded again tons of this gravel in there. And it's also the top of that, where the stairway meets the top of that ridge. So the Metro Parks will probably never allow us to excavate to work in that area, given the fact that that trail is probably the most popular trail in the 100 miles of the Cleveland Metro Parks. So we'll probably never get to see in there. The only hope that we might have is that that stairway that they built a couple of years ago, some of it's eroding away. And so we're kind of hoping that more of it erodes away, that they actually have to move it. And if they move it to a new location, we have the perfect place for it. And then we might be able to get in there to explore that area. But right now, you know, we're sort of landlocked and not being able to get in there. And it's really unfortunate because we expected that would be the area where we would expect to perhaps find caches of some sort of sacred objects that may help us reveal really what was going on up there. You know.
Jaden says, thank you for a great presentation. And Jackson Coleman, what might be the significance to there being 3 embankments at the Fort Hill when considering the religious purpose of the site?
Not sure. That I couldn't tell you. We don't know. The water is an interesting feature, though. You know, historic tribes in the eastern woodlands believe these water features can sort of protect the sacred areas away from ghosts and malevolent spirits. We wonder if that isn't what's going on here, right? You have 3 embankments with which would have had 3 water features in front of each, perhaps for that same reason. We don't know, but it was an intriguing thing reading some of the historic work. I can't remember the author or the archaeologist off the top of my head now, but it's in my report on that. But as to which groups we have that belief, but it's something that's worth pondering here.
Santa Ulrich says, thank you for a wonderful presentation. And Michael E. Smith said, a great talk, but he's got to skip out. And I don't see any more questions. Does anybody want to type real quick here? What was the main point of access to the top of the bluff?
Ooh, the main access, there's a natural chasm that really splits half of that plateau. And you could probably get up that pretty easily. And also to the west, there's another low point that sort of leads up to the plateau. So you could have easily accessed it that way. You never would have been able to come from where the stairway is. That's a really narrow bluff, and it's quite vertical. There would have been virtually no way anybody would have came up from the east. So the progression would have been from the west or from the north through these sort of natural through the natural landform. And that's also where they have an additional stairway and another path leading up to this Fort Hill trail it's about 1.5 mile trail that you can walk around the entire bluff from the visitor center there. It's really accessible for anybody there.
Mary Lee says she likes your background with Lady Cabell.
Yeah, it's cool, huh? I got that from the Cleveland Museum of Art. I wrote an article for them years ago on that piece. And I do some consulting with Sue Berg at the Cleveland Museum of Art, the curator. And when they were remodeling the galleries at the Cleveland Museum of Art, I always said they made a mock-up of this stela. And I said, if they ever got rid of it, let me know. So they called me up and said, hey, come get it. So I got this giant mock-up that's on foam board, photographic foam board. And I'm thrilled beyond words to have this thing. It's awesome. So, I mean, it's life size. So it's an incredible piece of art. Everybody comes over and they just stare at this thing going, how did you get that down here? I'm in my basement. But it's an excellent backdrop for when I was teaching Zoom for the last 2 years, you know, when most of our universities were going Zoom because of the pandemic. But yeah, I appreciate it. I love it too.
And I don't see any more questions, but I just want to let all your students know that I made you a list. I don't know how to make it visible, but anyway, I'll send you the names of everybody that attended, and you
Awesome.
can double check your extra credit efforts.
Yeah, no, they're on here. I see them all. I was writing them as well. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. And thank you all for participating tonight. It was an honor to speak to all of you guys. Again, I'm a big fan of Jim and Michael's Aztlander for years and years. And so, and their web blogs and their blogs and all their other pages. I mean, do you guys ever sleep? That would be my question. Because you're posting everything in Mesoamerica and everything sort of, North America. I'm a man who works in 2 different locations. So I'm always torn. Every night there's a new lecture I can watch or witness or observe, and it's awesome. So thank you guys for doing what you do. And I can't emphasize that enough. It's just really great to hear the caliber of talks and to be, to have this opportunity to speak on our work. I'm grateful. So thanks a lot.
All right.